And I really thank y'all for coming. Can you hear me? Too much. Oh, I have to really speak up then, you guys. Yeah, so first off, I'd like to introduce Kelly Victor. Kelly is our office manager and special projects coordinator. She did a beautiful job on arranging logistics for this event. So thank you, Kelly. Thank you.
Quick things I wanted to make sure that you all are partners with us here out in the lobby. Child Advocates San Antonio, Southwest Workers Union, Friends of Government Canyon, and Sierra Club Alamo Group. So they have tables set up here, and we'll hope that you'll take an opportunity to visit with them and allow them to give you some updates on their latest efforts before you take off this evening. As far as refreshments, if you need to pop out for a second, feel free to our refreshment table here. And as for the restrooms, they're right around the corner past the trophy case here. And we do want to let you all know that we are marching in the MLK March, cold as it's going to be. If anybody wants to come out and join us, I've got my business cards and I'd be happy to share information about that. So thank you so much. We're thrilled that you're here. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Kelly. Yeah, and so I'd like to announce that we have, I think our only elected official here is Tommy Calvert. Saqib Sheikh is a city council candidate for District 8. So good for you all for coming. And so I guess we know on the state and national level, we are not going to see very much action on preventing climate change. So we really feel like it's incumbent on the cities and to try to build resiliency into our systems because we know that there are a lot of dangerous things coming. So we have a wonderful panel here tonight. Our moderator is the lovely Anna Sandoval. Anna Sandoval. With 2 decades of experience in environmental planning, public education and engagement, and environmental justice. And it currently serves as Senior Director of Climate and Justice and Energy Initiative at the National Association for Asset Builders. As a former San Antonio City Councilwoman, she led the adoption of the city's climate action plan and the creation of the resilient, energy efficient in San Francisco Bay Area, and worked with environmental justice communities around issues of air pollution and created numerous partnerships for climate initiatives with area nonprofits. She holds a BS in chemical engineering from MIT, MS in environmental engineering from Stanford University, and MPH in environmental health from the Harvard Chan School of Public Health. She lives with her 2-year-old and next door to her mother, Julia. Thank you so much for moderating. Good
night. Can you hear me okay?
Oh yeah, you're much.
So this is a slightly informal forum. We're in the smaller room. We had thought about being in a larger room, but we're going to be here. There's no mic. You can go out and have wine and bring it back in here. So what I'm really trying to say is we'll talk for a little bit. Our panelists will talk and share their knowledge, but we also want to hear from you during the discussion. We've got the room until 8 o'clock, so at some point we will turn it over to you and hear your questions, hear your commentary. We'll just keep it civil. So I'm going to jump into introducing our panelists, or actually right before I do that, can I take a quick poll? Who works in this space? What we might call climate change or resiliency or the environment. Let's just lump it all together. Anybody who works in this?
What do you mean work?
Yeah. You get a paycheck. Okay, you work in it, but you don't get a paycheck for it. All right. Anyone for whom this is new? They're really here to learn. Okay, Be proud. No, you should. For those people who are here, for whom this is new, we definitely want to hear questions from you, and every question is welcome. Okay, so let me turn over to introduce our discussion. And feel free to stand up if you want to when I say your name. I don't know if everyone got a good look at me. And I'm going to say a few words about you, but I'm also going to ask you at some point to share who you are with everyone. So the first on my list here is Miss Laura Patiño. Laura, should we address you as Laura or Laura? Laura is fine. Okay. Laura is a native Colombian and the Chief Resilience Officer for our great city of San Antonio, leading the development and implementation of citywide resilience efforts to help our communities equitably prepare for, bounce back, and withstand shock. Oh, there's a definition. That was going to be the next question. What's resilience? Okay. Prior to her role in San Antonio, Laura worked in Austin as Chief Resilience Officer, also in the city of Houston in harboring recovery. And even though she is from Colombia, Texas, Laura has called Texas home for over 6 years now. She lives here with her spouse, her daughter, and dog. So welcome to our panel. Moving on, we have Ms. Diana Lopez, our Executive Director with Southwest Workers Union. Can you all see Diana? Diana Lopez is a Chicana born and raised in San Antonio with deep ties to the Rio Bravo border. Her work with Southwest Workers Union, also called Centro por la Justicia, you can explain that to us in a second, involves linking issues around environmental justice, living wage, and accountable governance. So elected official and potential elected official listen up here. So Centro Sur works to reframe public policy to protect the community and increase the voices of local residents. Lopez has worked to transition to 35-plus-year organization, utilizing civic engagement techniques for issue-based organizing. Wow, this looks very technical. To scale our impact and directly reach community residents. She's most excited about the community development project renovating the property into a movement center and resilience hub. So welcome, Diana. We're very lucky to have you with us because I know you're everybody's busy, but you're really busy. Okay, moving on, I have Ms. Gigi Belmares, a clean energy advocate with Public Citizen. So Dee works for community-driven solutions to help our most vulnerable neighbors from extreme weather that is being fueled by the climate crisis. She was born and raised on the south side of San Antonio to working-class parents who showed her early on about conservation. Thank you, Dee, for being with us. And last but definitely not least is my former coworker and almost a neighbor. We're adjoining zip codes. Ms. Bianca Maldonado. Bianca's been involved with the city of San Antonio in many, many capacities. She was an aide and deputy chief of staff on my team when I was on council. She's also been a member and leader in the Tier 1 Neighborhood Coalition, a board member of the Monticello Park Neighborhood Association, and she's also been involved in service on many city boards and commissions. And when I say many, I mean many, including the Stormwater Management Advisory Board. Thank you very much, Ms. Maldonado. So jumping into some of our questions here, I'd like to start by having each of you tell us maybe a couple of words about what you do and also how you define resilience. Today's panel is really about climate resiliency, so we'll try to keep it more or less in there. But I'll go ahead and start with Laura. As the Chief Resilience Officer, it's in your title, so you probably have to talk about this a lot. Could you tell us a little bit about what you do and then how you define resilience?
Well, thanks. I'm really excited to be here today and talk to y'all about what we do and what this collective panel and their work they're doing to advance resilience in San Antonio. And I'll start with that, right? As you see here in this panel, we have a diversity of folks coming together to talk about resilience. It doesn't mean just one thing. And so as a city chief resilience officer, that is one of the biggest challenges. And as I came on, about a year ago, I came on, I work with the city manager, report through the city manager, and I get to work with different departments to really advance resilience efforts. And that was one of the key questions. What does resilience mean for the city internally as an organization? And what does resilience mean externally for our community? And so I, for the purposes of the role, really work with the urban definition, the definition for urban resilience, which is the ability for a city to prepare for, respond, withstand, and adapt or bounce back from shocks and stressors. Shocks being the major disruptions and disasters that we face. That could be a winter storm, extreme cold event. That could be a terrorist attack, a cyber attack that really disrupts our system. And the stressors, which are the underlying vulnerabilities. So that means really the vulnerabilities that impact our community's capacity to deal with the day-to-day, and the challenges that they face. So issues like poverty, access to quality education, access to healthcare, and how those impact the ability to prepare for, respond, and withstand the next disaster and the next event. So we right now are working with that definition as a city, and that has been primarily the goal for this first year of building our resilience strategy, which is really to ensure that we have an internal working definition for resilience before we go out to the community and before we go out to partners to create the broader definition of what that means for us. So I'll leave it there because I know we have more questions where we'll dive deeper into all of this.
Deanna, could you tell us a little bit about what you do and how you define resilience?
So we, and let me know in the back if y'all can't hear me, but part of our work, we're a community center, a community hub, where we define ourselves as a social justice center for working class families. And we do a lot of many things, right? But the majority of our work is really trying to reframe public policy and ensuring that residents have a direct voice in what's happening in their neighborhoods. Many of that includes breaking down issues to the neighborhood, to the block, and really having people understand what that means for them, and then defining what a solution can look like for themselves, right? And then fighting for that solution. Sometimes that looks like sidewalks for their block. Sometimes it looks like bus covers. Other times it looks like things like funds or a change in policy, right? But it's really about ensuring that the people can define the change for themselves and really have the tools and ability to speak for themselves. We're rooted in environmental justice, right? So the ability for a person to speak for themselves and represent themselves is really important. We are a former labor union with the school districts here in Texas, and so we really ensure that those that might not have the ability to be in every meeting and every space and do as much of the research has a chance to really have a say in what their community looks like. And so when we talk about resiliency, we really talk about we can't ignore the reality that resiliency is really addresses a climate crisis, right? Which is a symptom of a larger crisis related to sort of the addiction of digging, burning, and dumping, right? This economy, right, that's focused on fossil fuels. And so part of resiliency is, not to echo what has been said, is our people's ability to weather the storm, right? Are people's ability to weather the storm where they live, where they work, where they play, where they pray, and beyond, right? And so for SWU as an organization, it's our responsibility to mobilize people and really launch things like rapid responses, mutual aid, to ensure people have their immediate needs, but are also thinking about what is a long-term solution to this issue that we're facing, so that we don't have to replicate this every few months, because now we're at the rate of we're having to go into rapid response every 6 months, every year, right? And so we're not really creating solutions, right? So a big part of resiliency is ensuring that our people are together and that have spaces just to talk about these things and learn about what's happening in their community and create solutions and fight for them.
I'm just going to add some comments here. So I've worked on climate change before, and certainly when I was on the council advocated for climate solutions. But I will tell you, even then I was not aware of all of the work that the MS group was doing. And after I left council, I had the opportunity to work with her on a project just recently, and I was absolutely floored by all of the stuff that comes out of your organization, all the different types of groups that you help, all the knowledge that you have, and how forward thinking you guys are. So I just want to say it was like the little organization that could. But yeah, very happy by the work that Diana does. I'm really glad you were able to join us today. And like Laura said, we have representation from different types of organizations, going from very local community-based organization, really focused on the things, all the things that you said. Let's go to Dee, who works for a national organization, but here in San Antonio. So can you tell us what Resilience is and a little bit about what you do?
Sure. Like Anna mentioned earlier, I'm a clean energy advocate with Public Citizen. We are a national organization, but in Texas, we work on energy policy and environmental policy. Locally, I work very close with CPS Energy to decarbonize their power supply, to get CPS Energy to not burn fossil fuels, right? We're closing a coal plant in 2028. We're looking at other energy sources other than fossil fuel gas in order to power the city. Served on their rate advisory committee for 2 years, in which we studied rates. We went through 2 rate increases during that time. We went through a planning process that resulted in which will be happening in 2028, the shuttering of our last remaining coal plant, the Spruce coal plant. So, and also to some degree with the city through the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, served on one of their committee in implementing the plan. They are reinstituting those committees, so I'm looking forward to the folks that will be looking at revising our climate plan. I don't think I could talk about resiliency without talking about mitigation, right? We're in a climate crisis, and we're seeing the effects of the climate crisis every single day. And sadly, the people in Los Angeles are experiencing the wildfires. The events that are happening, whether it's hurricanes, the hurricane that hit North Carolina, the wildfires, rising sea levels. If you've ever been to Miami, when all of a sudden, like, the water's just rushing through the streets, that's because of sea level rise. And that is being caused by the climate crisis. Climate crisis is happening because we continue our dependence on fossil fuels, right? Yes, San Antonio is shutting their last coal plant, but we are also adding more gas to our power supply, and that is not what we need to do. So we have to stop our dependence on fossil fuels. But for me, resiliency is responding to those people that are on the worst end of the climate crisis. And Diana has their members at SWU. They do a great job of addressing that. We got Nancy with Unida. I work close with Diana and her members. I worked with Nancy recently on an application for an EPA grant. So these are all groups that are are working hard to help their neighbors, to help their members adapt and be resilient. But it's also, getting the resources to people that are suffering from the climate crisis, making sure that our neighbors are aware of programs that make their homes energy efficient, that their homes are weatherized, that they have the information that they need, the resources that they have, whether it's at the city or the county or at the utility level. So for me, resiliency is just helping all of those people that are just, suffering right now.
Thank you, Dee Dee, for all the work that you do. And Dee Dee's been doing this for years in this capacity and then with another organization prior to that. And so let's go over to Ms. Bianca Maldonado. I know personally that Bianca's always been concerned about people who cannot advocate for themselves, but I'll let you say it in your own words. What do you do in this field? And
thank you, Councilwoman. I advocate for my neighbors. It's the person that lives next door to me, the person who doesn't have a paid representative. We're just all neighborhood people. We're all volunteers. We care about where we live. We care about what happens to our neighbor who lives next to it. And I will tell you what really motivated me was I got a knock at 6 a.m. on my door one day. It was in 2007. We had a big flood that came through. We had a big rain event that came. The water came out of the street and flooded people's garages and went underneath their house and didn't get any water in their house, but a lot of the houses in my neighborhood are on Pier and P. So I live in a 100-year floodplain. My house in the floodplain when I purchased it was one of those expansions of the floodplain as a result of the flood of '98 and the flood of 2002. And so I hear my neighbors who were there when all those elected officials said, it'll never happen again. We'll take care of this. We'll plan. Well, guess what? We're still in the floodplain and it's expanding. So right now there's new maps that are been submitted to FEMA that it's probably 2 more years. But what that's doing is it's expanding the floodplain in our most vulnerable areas in our city. You think of the urban core was developed without fundamental drainage codes in place within our city policy. And so you look at what's happening today, you look at where we're sitting. This is an example of infill development happening in some of our most vulnerable areas. How do we protect those who don't have a voice, who may not be well versed in who to call, who to talk to, what meeting to show up for, or when the policies are up for revision? It's important as a neighborhood organization like Tier 1, we're a coalition of neighborhoods across the urban core. We see no council district boundaries, but we see commonality in the issues that we face when we see changes in our community, because we're very unique. We don't have the same protections as a master plan development community. We only have the Unified Development Code within the city of San Antonio to protect us. So it's very important when that gets updated every 5 years that the group that evaluates that, which is the Planning Commission Technical Advisory Committee, and I do sit on that, to ensure that we have the right voices at the table to know what you and I experience in our homes, because we don't have a paid lobbyist. We have elected officials, but we kind of joke, they come and go. There's not a longevity for that. They're not there for 20 years, but you are. You're there for 30, 40 years. And so the whole goal is that when you look at from a drainage standpoint, from a resiliency standpoint, how can we sustain the volatility of rainfall events? Because we know based on history that we have seen an increase, and that's why these flood maps are changing and have been proposed. And so as we move forward with those new draft maps, what's the city and the county and the federal government, what are we all doing to lobby and hold the state accountable too? Because you know what the state did? They built highways right through all our neighborhoods. And they don't design those highways to hold a 100-year storm event. You could pass over them in a 100-year storm event, but they're dumping water left and right, east and west, north and south, depending on how that roadway is going. So it's all about working together. And it's all ensuring that everybody has a plan to work together. The city recently created a stormwater management committee that now looks at prioritizing projects. And it's looking at what you have to say. What are your comments? It's not waiting until we have a bond committee and there's already a list of projects and then we hear citizen input. No, we need to hear citizen input. We need to be looking at all these projects as you move along, because There are differences in drainage. There's the 100-year flood event, and then there's people that are, you can't even pass the street when we get a couple of inches of rain. They may not be a 100-year flood area, but they see it more often, more frequently. And so how can we ensure that people are safe in their homes and that you can not cut off emergency access points? So those are key things that are looked at when you look at resiliency, because you don't want to have somebody isolated or damaged, and how do you bounce back? And then as I was mentioning about infill too, when you look at master plan development communities outside Loop 410, outside Loop 1604, as they add on all their phases, are we ensuring that everybody is protected during that time frame too? I mean, that is ultimately what the city looks at when they look at drainage policy. And it's really important. I know the councilwoman, you did a lot of work when you were in office with some of the updates that were done to policy to ensure that our city was doing everything that we could, because we can't build enough with $2 billion worth of drainage needs. There's no way we're going to get everybody out, right? So if they have to get insurance though, if they have a federally insured mortgage on their property. So the city qualified for a discount through the CRS program, finally. So it's getting those steps in place, holding them accountable to have standards to clean our drainage infrastructure, to ensure that it's operational, and ensure that it's in its totality and the best use for our city. As I always said, it's not a matter of resources, but it's a matter of priority. Because they can marvel us when they're not.
All right, that was the first. So thank you, Bianca, for those comments. And when I was running, Bianca was there helping me for when I was running the first time. And I remember she got up and she spoke at one of the public things I was doing at a taqueria. And I was like, Bianca, are you sure you don't want to be the one running for office? But no, extremely knowledgeable and lots of historical context for what's happened here in San Antonio. So a tremendous resource for all of us. But I do want to point out something that she mentioned, and that's that when you're inside San Antonio, the more historic parts, the older parts of San Antonio, you don't have the same protections, right, that newer parts of the city have, because they were developed when people got more woke about, you should have sidewalks or you should have this or that. So just keep that in mind when we start talking about who really needs the support and the protection. Who do we have to think about when we plan for a resilient community? So that takes us to our next question. And feel free at any point to comment on something somebody said earlier. Go backs are totally allowed when I moderate. So can each of you tell us what you feel are the largest resiliency priorities for San Antonio right now, and are the most vulnerable when we talk about resiliency in San Antonio? And I will let you guys volunteer in what order you want to go to. And somebody's looking at me very eagerly, and that is Laura.
No, I mean,
if you don't want to go first, that's fine.
I'll have to go. I just, with this introduction and the first introduction question of what resilience means to us and what we do, I'm a little bit speechless in what I'm hearing from each of y'all's stories, and that is because y'all have, from the perspective of that a chief resilience officer brings, you hit it right in the point, right, and right, hit it right in the center. That it starts with people. It's human-centered. And so when we think about resilience as a city and the priorities for the city, we start with the individuals and the individuals that need it the most. I like to say that we're as resilient as our most vulnerable, because those are the individuals that are really the foundation of our community, the foundation of everything that we do. And so if as a network, as a community of resources, we're not focused, then we're not being more resilient, because every time there is a disaster, every time there is a major disruption, the most vulnerable are often set back. They don't bounce forward. They're further set back. And that is in relation to, a flood. That's in relation to extreme heat. We all lived it this summer, extreme cold. What does that do as it impacts our health, as it impacts our jobs, the ability to show up to our jobs and think about resilience. So when folks are thinking about their day-to-day needs, and at the other end of the spectrum, the city is asking and saying, there's a disruption that's coming, there's a storm that's coming, there's a winter freeze, prepare, stock up on food in your pantry, on water, buy a generator. And yet studies have been concluded for Texas that over 60% of residents don't have $400 in their bank account for an emergency because, they're living paycheck to paycheck. They're worrying about how do I feed my family. They're not worried about how can I stock up my pantry for 7 days worth of food and emergency supplies that are quite expensive to be able to live, for 7 days. And so I think that's really the core of, what is the biggest resilience priority in how we look at the challenges that we have. How do we serve the individual? I'll also say that on the other end, on the more kind of analytical, and as we set up the program for resilience as a city, like I said, I've been here for a year, a little less than a year, and I say because I did take some time off for maternity leave. But I've been here for a year, and over that the time this past year, we have done a series of evaluations and assessments. And the first evaluation was looking at 46 different city plans and city documents and strategies that have been put out there to categorize and catalog how we were talking about resilience. Even though we didn't have a resilience office, even though we didn't have a resilience program officially, several departments were already starting to integrate a lot of these concepts already in our work. And then after that, we did a further assessment that validated what those plans had written and council had approved in many of those. So then overlay it with the current data set. And what came down to was key shocks and key stresses, but really we're able to organize that in 5 focus areas of resilience. So, all that to say, the 5 focus areas of resilience that are a priority are climate resilience, which we're talking about today. But there's 4 others that are interrelated, right? When we talk about resilience, it's about those interconnected systems, and that we can't just look at one thing in a silo, right? Everything is connected. And so climate resilience is one, disaster readiness is another, infrastructure readiness, quality of life and opportunity for the individuals, and the final one that we talk about that is often, I think, overlooked when we talk about resilience is governance. And I don't mean governance as in the city governance structure and council, but I mean governance in terms of how we work together as a city to serve the individual, to serve neighborhoods, to serve our own city operations, and then regionally with our partners. What the partnerships and the collaboration that needs to take place in order to be effective at actually driving forward resilience action. So I'd say, wrap it up with that. Those are the 4 priorities, the 5 priorities that we're now looking into putting all of our work in a resilience lens.
Nada and I had coffee not too long ago, and she gave me these 5 priorities, and I was really surprised to see them, but really happy that you guys had done this work, and personally really excited about the governance priority because I love collaboration, and that's something that we worked toward when Bianca and I were at City Hall. So very excited to see what comes next from your work. Anybody else? Priorities going forward? Largest resiliency priorities and the most vulnerable. Sure.
I work a lot around helping neighbors make their homes more energy efficient. There are programs that If Energy, the county has programs so that our most vulnerable neighbors could weatherize their home, add insulation, make their homes cooler. in the summer and warmer in the winter time. And these are great programs, but what I think what the city or the county could do more to make our city resilient is that we have a large older housing stock in San Antonio and in the county, where some of these homes cannot get weatherized. We can't make them energy efficient because the age of the roof, their electrical system is outdated. I think there should be a focus on getting dollars to these neighbors who need a new roof, who might need to upgrade their electrical system. It would be a game changer for these people in their homes. I'm going to point to Nancy again and also my coworker who's not here, Deborah Ponce. She's a climate justice organizer with Public Citizen. They got some funding from the city to put heat pumps in people's houses instead of using these inefficient window units that are inefficient, use a lot of electricity, and really don't keep the homes cool when the people need it the most. So they have a project where they're going to neighborhoods and they're finding neighbors that they can put these heat pumps in. Wouldn't it be great that if we also were able to get them a new roof and throw some solar panels on it, some battery storage, really maximize clean energy for the people that need it the most. Now, those are the people that have homes. I think also where we need to think about resiliency is for our houseless neighbors that are living in, living outside when it's 100+ degrees, or recently when it was 28, how low was it, 28 degrees, or it's going to be 28 degrees or 27 degrees this.
It felt like.
Right, it was cold. I don't like it cold. It's cold. If it's under 65, I don't like it. But these people, the houseless neighbors are suffering. We don't know how many people are dying from extreme heat. Deceleration News has reported on a couple of houseless neighbors that died in the extreme heat. Albert, who lost limbs during Winter Storm Uri, and then Jessica, who passed away this past summer when it was over 100 degrees. And the county medical examiner is not counting these deaths. And we need to, because they need help, and we need to know really how much of an impact the climate crisis is bearing down on our most vulnerable neighbors, our senior citizens, the disabled, but also our houseless neighbors.
Thank you, Dee Dee. I was thinking of opening it up for a couple of questions at this time. If you guys are okay with that, you ready? Okay, bring the fire. Tell us your name.
I just wanted to comment on what Dee Dee was saying about the mini split program that we installed. So we were able to install 20 mini splits into people's homes in the month of December. And it's a collaboration, some neighborhood associations, Puerto Unida. We all applied for the money, the climate readiness money, and this is so. But as a result, so people applied. So we had a budget to keep, and as long as the home was able to sustain us putting it in, and it would pass inspection, then they qualified, regardless of income, regardless of status. We didn't look at any of that. But we wound up having to turn some people down who really needed it because of their electrical, because we knew they weren't going to pass city with their electrical, so it's about finding funds to prepare the homes to install the mini splits, not only just to buy the mini splits and to install them, but now we need to figure out how do we prepare the homes that don't qualify for that because of the roof or the electrical, those kinds of things. So just food for thought.
Thank you, Nancy. I think that came up too, just like the cascade of requirements when you've got an older home. Do we have any, Marisol?
Yes, I just wanted to add to what Dee Dee was saying. So I'm Marisol. I'm one of the co-editors of Deceleration. I wrote the story about Jessica. She was my friend. She passed away this last summer. I wrote about Albert Garcia a couple years ago when he lost his limbs after Winter Storm Uri, and he also died 2 summers ago
Jessica and Albert both died sort of at the same time of the year in late August, when we were going through a period of time where we had over 100-degree days for many years. I brought the stories if people are interested in reading them. I can pass them around. If you want to look at it on your phone, there's a QR code so that you can keep passing it to your neighbors. But yeah, like part of the issue with Jessica and with Albert as well as we kind of don't know because of the way we collect data at the local level from the medical examiner's office, which is through Bexar County, right? We don't have a good sense of how many people are actually passing away on the streets from extreme heat or from extreme cold, right? There's other places around the country that collect that data in very systematic ways. Maricopa County is a very good in Arizona, right? Phoenix, the hottest urban center in the United States. They're very systematic about collecting data on heat-related deaths. So not just when people die of hyperthermia, but in the case of Jessica, for example, there were multiple medical issues, right? It was the heat, but it was also underlying heart disease. It was also medications that she was on, possibly, street methamphetamine as well. A lot of things mixed together. But if you don't have a method for for really understanding the role that heat can play, then her death gets certified officially as, oh, it's just drugs, right? And her body was 126 degrees when she died. So there's concrete things that we can do, right, to make those deaths visible. Because if we don't make them visible, how can we do anything about it, right? And so, yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to add that. Thank you, Marisol, for sharing that. And yes, in the back.
Yes, my name is Rachel, and I wanted to ask a real basic question about how you're developing resiliency in the groups that are the absolute most disenfranchised from the city, and specifically, what are your organizations personally doing to employ people who are deaf, which is the most disenfranchised group in Bexar County?
We'll turn that over to the panel, and just to reiterate, the question is, how are your groups reaching out to the most disenfranchised individuals in our communities, in particular the community who is deaf? Any of you want to take that? Okay, Lara and Viana.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's no lack of resources that are available, and also, unfortunately, we're not doing enough, right? And that's being completely vulnerable. That language access is one of the bigger challenges that we face in terms of reaching out to communities, specifically as it relates to creating awareness around the risk and bringing folks in for outreach to be able to co-create solutions at the city. So one of the things that the city does with their programs and language access programs, especially as it relates to emergency management, is that we have partnered to be able to provide ASL interpretation services at meetings, of course, as well as trying to make our website as well as all the materials more accessible. And that is just a start. One of the examples that I can bring from specifically during a disaster is how the emergency management folks reach out to do wellness checks, right, for folks that to ensure that they're okay, right? And so using technology like PPY, but also physically going to individuals' homes to make sure that that they're okay, is another tool that we have available. Now, it's like I said, there's no lack of tools, but unfortunately, it's not where it needs to be, and that's an area where we have a lot of improvement to do, both in creating internal awareness for our own staff, to be able to train staff to know how to properly communicate, but also externally to understand how folks can access the support that they need to be able to access city services and programs, because they do it.
Yeah, I have a quick question, Rhonda. Where do you get that information about how to contact you if there's somebody who needs services?
Yeah, so 311 is usually the best kind of, blanket approach to say call 311. That's where you get all the city information. But I'd be happy to provide also further information on that and where to access.
We have a few of our programs, so we run through the angle of what we call just recovery, and that really ensures that people have access to their basic immediate needs. And so in 2020, we began a fresh food program, and we've been doing it every month through the pandemic. So we stayed open as a center, and figured it out, right? We figured out how to use our resources and kind of massage some grants so that our people needed what they needed, right? And had to really fight for funders and say, this is what people need right now. Everything is closed. And so these are the angles of how we build strong communities, is ensuring that people have their basic needs, and that means food, right? Bellies full, happy people, right? And that is also how we connect with each other, right? So we continue to this day. Our first one is in February, but we run a fresh food program. That's veggies, sometimes eggs, basic necessities for people to build culturally full bags of produce. And then one of the things that we're most proud of is that we don't do intrusive questions. You come, show up, you get a bag of food. That's it. Sometimes we'll ask you questions on like what you want to do next or what you want to see right at the organization, but it's really about making sure that people have direct access to their basic needs. The same thing with assistance. So we figured out that our population, our group of people who particularly did not have access to Wi-Fi or internet, or it wasn't the bill that people chose to pay at that time of the month. So we started doing utility clinics where we had a printer, we had translation, we had access needs, and we basically would write, we would transcribe for people, because a lot of those applications were online. People didn't have access to or had everything on their phone, right? And so we would print out, we would scan, we would upload, and we would sit with people along that application so that they would be able to get access to the funds, the weatherization programs. We invited CPS and, things like that. And so that's a lot of the type of work that we try to do, is sort of what are the barriers, and if we have power within ourselves to do it, then we're going to run systems or clinics or meetings or access points where people can directly bridge that gap. And so so that oftentimes means multiple sources of translation. And so we do actually have somebody on staff who is ASL certified, and many of our members who come through either need that access language support. And so our folks are prepared. They're prepared for cranky people. They're prepared for grumpy, morning people, right? And we welcome people, because that's really what matters. At that point, when a person is feeling embarrassed for even asking for a bag of food, it's important for us to really be able to show up as community leaders in that space with zero judgment, and being like, let's see how we could get this done, right? Leave me your number, I'll call you back next week and we'll get the documents and submit it. Because at that point, that becomes a priority for themselves. And so that's a little bit about sort of how the specific programs that we run, but I think the ones that are most important are the clinics where people are directly like need support directly filling out stuff, taking photos, printing them out, scanning, stuff like that. And then Spanish language support as well. And so I think those are the places where it's like if we could figure out barriers and if organizations can support in doing that. So sometimes people shy away from doing service work, but it's part of what our community needs. And sometimes we need to kind of come into that sphere so that we can ensure that people access their immediate needs, because if that's their priority at that time, it means maybe in a year or 2 years they're able to then participate in a different way, right? So we're talking about long-term sustainability. The other thing that we try to do is sort of just last week we implemented a rapid response measurement, right, where we put out alerts on social media. We started calling our list of people, and then we also ordered kits for our houseless neighbors. Our neighbors around, we're on the east side of San Antonio, right around downtown, right? So we implemented and ordered supplies or had some on hand, as well as ordered heaters for our folks. And so we do fan dish rows, we'll do heaters, and then we'll do fundraising for that. So we'll reach out to our alliances or people and said, let's work on creating rapid response funds, just resiliency funds, things like that foundations or grant leaders are working on, so that it's implemented in nonprofits' budgets and they're able to easily access things and then distribute it with, say, like networks or like people who are not like affiliated, but are just groups of people that are doing really good work on the ground. And so we'll do that type of like weaving together. So we ensure that like we really, like when you talked about priorities, really moving the money to the places that are needed the most.
But thank you very much.
That was long-winded.
But that was a great way to let everyone know that the rest of the talk is going to be in Spanish, just to make sure we get to. I didn't tell you all about this one. No. Actually, so I want to go back to some of the questions that we prepared for you. So let's talk about local government's role. I think you've done a beautiful job talking about what you can do outside of local government. We certainly can't be resilient without that. But if any of you could wave a magic wand about what our local government would do in the next year to address resiliency, what would that look like? It could be money, it could be an ordinance, and then I'd like to hear more about what you think about our cities, how our city is addressing this. So I'm going to go back to Bianca, who had a lot to say about UDC and master plan.
I wanted to add on what she was saying, though. When you're talking about the vulnerable communities, it's about knowing your neighbor. One of the things that happened with Tier 1 during the winter storm was the Neighbor Helping Neighbor program that was very successful in the Beacon Hill area. There's a lot of older homes, and it was really knowing your neighbor and going out and checking on them, teaching people how to turn off the water, teaching people that repair their pipes, and bringing resources to them and elevating their concerns to elected officials so that they could be addressed. I mean, I've got to tell you, who still had broken pipes. So how do you advocate for that individual who is embarrassed to come forward? You know, it's about knowing your neighbor and seeing what you can do. And, you know, for the digital divide, too, you can't forget about those people that don't have access to those devices that we all rely on, and how that paper copy of a newsletter may be very beneficial to them. I know in my neighborhood, we hand deliver. And so having that network out there in the event of an emergency, you can call on your network to help distribute information, because not everybody has that smartphone. And so it's about checking on your neighbor too, and knowing who lives next door to you. I'm very thankful of the community that I live in Monticello Park. Many of us know each other, and celebrate holidays together and check on each other. And when people walk through the neighborhood, they when they see something, they'll raise concern if they see something that's unusual. But I think to your point, Councilwoman, it's you you could wave a wand. I would love to see more neighborhood projects focused effort, a more neighborhood project focused effort by the city, as opposed to seeing things downtown and seeing things in tourist areas for maybe just 1 year. Can you allocate millions of dollars to improve neighborhoods? To me, we see some of the biggest challenges with speeding, with traffic calming in nature, safety for kids coming to and from school. We also see challenges with drainage. We see challenges with these small mom and pop owned businesses that have maybe been in business for generations that are embedded in neighborhoods. How do we support those individuals? Because it's not just, I say, those of us who live there, it's those who live and work there too. We can't forget about that. We're all in here together. And so, I see all these programs. There's all this red tape at just to get to the end result or get access to some funding. And I always think that if you make it a priority, it can be successful. And so when you say that, wave that wand, I think anything's possible. We have a great city, and they have the ability to do some phenomenal things. Because we have a county commissioner here, we can't forget about our county. I have a great county commissioner, Justin Rodriguez. So you have to look at the partnership. You can't just level the responsibility with one entity. How can you leverage? How can you work together? To me, that's the end result. To be as resilient when you get punched, how do you get back up and fight again? Because that's really how do you, from a flooding standpoint, how do you get back up and clean your house and get ready? Because you're going to live in that house. We haven't seen a whole lot of folks that have been displaced from flood events. There have been a few, and there's been a few buyouts, but for the most part, those people go back and live in their home. And so how do you move that needle forward? Maybe you can't get them out of the floodplain, but maybe you can improve the drainage around their property with a small infrastructure project that would prevent the nuisance flooding they see outside the 100-year event. So it's about thinking outside the box, I think, and understanding what's going on in those neighborhoods.
Thank you. Anybody else? Magic wand. What new ordinance would the city adopt? What new program would it have? It might address heat island. It might address flooding, air quality. What's that thing you would like to see?
I would like to see, if I could wave one, and I know that like GEAA has gotten some money and is working around transit-oriented development, but transportation cars are big emitters of pollution. I would love if I could just get city to throw a bunch of money at rail. I think that would be not only it's not just a climate solution, but I think it would make people happier to be riding in something other than stuck in traffic. Right? Let's get people out of their cars and into, let's say, light rail. I'm not a transportation expert by any means. There's a group called San Antonians for Rail Transit. They're a great group that are doing some work locally and probably going to be advocating for rail at the ledge. I know that there's some talks about rail between San Antonio and Austin. Would absolutely love to be able to get on something and just go to Austin and listen to some music and not have to drive my car. 35 is actually absolutely a nightmare. They're expanding 35 between San Antonio going up north past Austin. We know that building more highways does not reduce traffic. It increases pollution. So yeah, let's throw a lot of money at something, not cars and highways and byways.
Right. I like that dream. I'm sorry.
I got a quick one.
Yeah.
My magic wand will ensure that and I had actually wrote something down.
That's like you knew the questions in advance.
But that the laws of nature will not be subordinate to the laws of capitalism. Therefore, whenever we get close to that red line, people kind of freeze. It kind of causes this right? Where it's like, okay, we're getting too close to this red line. where the expense of the people and the planet are at risk. And part of this magic wand will also erase people's debt to CPS Energy.
Oh, yeah. All right, thank you. Very explicit. Laura, come on.
My magic wand is to make y'all. This is a great question because I get to hear what y'all are thinking, and from my perspective, we're one of the fastest growing cities areas, and so as we have this infill development and as we expand further and become this very large metropolitan area, it's really about how we bring it back into connecting our natural environment with our built infrastructure. We don't do that enough, and we aren't making our streets, our neighborhoods, the areas that we live, work, and play resilient because we're missing the opportunity to integrate the natural environment and bring back the natural environment where we've destroyed it. So I think that is one of the magic wands that I would say.
Thank you. Speaking of bringing back the natural environment, let's talk about something called the Tree Mitigation Fund that the city of San Antonio has. It's at the start of this. Is anybody familiar with the Tree Mitigation Fund in this? Of course, the master naturalist is. Just a quick blurb on what it is when there is a new development project occurring and trees need to be removed, the developer must pay a fee into what is called a mitigation fund. There are some nuances in that I won't go into, but the idea is that fund will mitigate the tree loss. So at the beginning of this year, I think there was about $7 million sitting in that fund. Or 8 million, sorry. And the city forecasted the beginning of this budget year, and the city forecasted that they would receive in revenues about another $8 million or $7 million for a total of $15 million this budget year in the tree mitigation fund. In the past, it's been used to fund a number of things. I know that there's been like a pilot project to plant trees in low and median income communities to help families do that on their private property. We've also seen it cover salaries for regular things that staff does. And maybe you read about the gorillas at the zoo that got, I think, about $500,000 from the tree mitigation fund to help them with their enclosure. So it's been used for a lot of things. But let's talk about, in your opinion, what's the role of the tree mitigation? Could there be a role in the tree mitigation fund in resilience for San Antonio? And what would that look like? So I see somebody nodding, and that is Ms. Bianca.
The irony is I was thinking, I forgot to mention trees, and then you brought up the tree mitigation fund. To see resources come back into a neighborhood, because I've seen what the city has done with the tree mitigation fund. Been used to supplement bond projects. There's a certain land bridge where all those trees on that bridge were paid for out of the tree mitigation fund and brought a great amenity to that area, to a new park. But what about our urban core communities? What about the heat island effect? What about the District 5 area that is the hottest area in the city? Where are the trees for those areas? One of the things that my current councilwoman secured was tree mitigation funding to enhance Woodlawn Lake Park, which is one of the number 1 or number 2 highest utilized parks within the city. That beautiful walk trail around the lake. Could you imagine if it was shaded? I mean, you can't walk on that trail literally on certain times because there's so many people that use it. But what about bringing that tree canopy in? What an impact that's going to bring. And then with the being resilient in the sense of when you look at our change in our climate, we've seen a lot of people lose a lot of trees in the past 12 to 18 months because of the extreme temperatures that we've experienced, specifically pecans and for. And so you think of those areas, and the city has the equity score that they look at for the new program. You know, they've had multiple programs. Hey, you can come up with your own program. They're willing to work with you. They have so much money, but not everybody knows that. Not everybody knows that you could come in and put a program together for your neighborhood and put some trees out in the right of way. Those are all benefits that should be known to residents to utilize. You know, they also are planting trees on school district properties because we've got to support our urban schools too. We got to ensure that those kids, when they go out and they play, they have the ability to have some shade. Because we know we're having hotter climates. We also know that shade can be beneficial in heating and cooling your house, and how those trees are positioned on your property. So how to make those resources available, because CPS does it too, but the city has such the ability with that. But they have a lot of money, essentially, and it's how do you prioritize and how do you write the criteria to ensure that it has the biggest bang for its buck, and it has the ability to influence our most vulnerable areas, the people who don't have access to this resource. I think that's the biggest challenge, to be honest. Is how they use that money. Because in my opinion, the gorillas shouldn't have gotten it.
So I will, this is the part where I stopped being a moderator and I became a panelist for a moment. I think one of the issues, at least that I saw on my time on council, was that we did not have a unified policy around the tree mitigation fund. And as much as you wanted to ask, wait a minute, but what do you use it for? But wait a minute, what are we going to use it for this year? It's really dispersed into, it's almost like, oh, let me just take a little bit from here and I'm going to slap it on this project, and slap it on this project, slap it on this project. And at the end, the tree mitigation fund can't fulfill the mission of really mitigating the tree loss. So do we have a comment on that from our master naturalist?
There are many master naturalists.
Oh, I'm sorry, the one I know.
I will put this in the context. For those of us who've been doing this for a couple of decades, the tree mitigation fund was a solution to somebody else's problem that then became a kind of a meager flow of sort of, I refer to it as SAP money, like blood money. You don't get any money in the mitigation fund until you destroy an intact environment somewhere else. The context I want to put it in is, I'm sorry, my name is Lisa Martinez. I am a master naturalist. And among many other modified tree hugger and a brand new forestry steward, which is a new program that the Parks Department has initiated. When we worked on the climate action plan, the weakest part of the plan was the land use plan, where there was a technical advisory committee for transportation and land use. And I attended because we had a proposal that we wanted to put in about using the entire city as a carbon sequestration project. There was nobody there talking about land. Everybody there was talking about transportation. So my magic wand would be, let's get serious about understanding land use. Facts that provided are, this is the largest, these are a very fast growing community. The facts are this sort of physical reality, which is that we have a shift of elevation in our community. So you put something on the north, it's going to drain south. You know, there's things that happen to old neighborhoods because they were there before the new neighborhoods got installed. It's much less about how big your drainage system is than it is about you've got an 800. Land use in other communities has reintroduced an integrated plan involving natural restoration and rehabilitation and things like that. We can do it. The issue I really wanted to put in forth is we're not going to get any support from our state. And with the change of administration, we'll be back to where we were when we did our first climate action plan, which is that the U.S. Agencies had basically been told not to participate in the climate planning through the rest of the world. So we had to go and look in international documents to find good examples. So I would entreat you, we've got the mitigation plan. It could become a powerful force. It could become a way for us to introduce projects on small scales and large scales, not just in city parks or in city schools. All of those are necessary, but I
for the last 5 years, I've been thinking if we only had a land use, an actual thinking through how we want the city to not just grow, but to be, sustainable, do the resilience, we might actually get somewhere, but we're going to have to do it on our own. That's my main reason of coming here is because we do flooding. Flooding happens in episodes. The heat island exists year round, but we feel it seasonally. And air quality is a year-round thing. So we have to work on different scales of both time and area and space. But we can do this. And you've got enormous amounts of capability sitting in this panel. But I would say that land use is the one we keep sort of slipping over. So these are part of land use, but land use is going to be the important thing. Thank you.
These are on next year's panel.
Yeah, go ahead, Dee Dee, and then Laura.
I'm gonna point again to Nancy because I've learned so much from Nancy and working with her over the last, I don't know how long, on applying for this EPA grant. But I don't know if this could be part of the tree mitigation fund. I've learned from Nancy that their, neighbors on the southwest side of San Antonio have these trees that they can't maintain. They're older, they're dying, or they have died. And one of the reasons is that they cannot afford to water these trees. And I know like when various, like whether it's SAWS or CPS Energy has these tree giveaways, those are great, right? Giving trees away are great, but like, do the people know like where to plant them? Can they water them? Can that tree mitigation fund go to like vouchers to, for SAWS so that because trees are beautiful, right? They sequester carbon. They cool off the neighborhoods that are facing urban heat islands. So I'm wondering if that could be part of the fund where some of our most vulnerable neighbors or senior citizens that are like having a hard time paying their utility bills, their water bill, their electric bill, could get some assistance to water their trees, and somebody to come out and say, hey, this is how you maintain it, maybe in the first few years, and then after that, this is what you have to do. But I think getting help to the people that are in these urban heat islands that want trees but can't really afford to water them, and we have to water them a lot.
I'm hearing think comprehensively and a little bit more long term about how you use the tree mitigation fund to actually accomplish. I'll go on to Laura.
Yeah, the other thing that I would add to thinking comprehensively is really about what are we trying to achieve, and ultimately, what is the metric that we're going to measure success with our tree mitigation funds. And if you look at other cities and what they have done, that have been really successful, they've actually established a tree canopy goal, right?
We have one.
We've had one since 1990.
Right?
Nobody
What is
talks
the
about
goal that is adopted by council, right? What is a goal that can be, it's out there. This is where we aspire to be by 20, whatever, I'm not going to throw any goal, right? We're going to plant X many number of trees, or we're going to have like 50%, I'm throwing numbers out there, don't quote me. We have to like truly evaluate what that right measure would be for us. Or every neighborhood, if we want to make it to hyper local scale, should have this percentage of a tree canopy goal, right? Within the neighborhood or with the street level, so that we can actually aspire to get to that. And I think that is one way where we can be more intentional about where we plant trees, how we maintain them, and where specifically they go to the areas that they need it the most.
So I'm going to go to our panelists, and then I actually have 3 people in the queue already for questions. They're all giving me little signals, so just hang tight. After Bianca, we'll go back to questions.
I just want to add on, the city does use the tree mitigation money to put infrastructure and to irrigate the tree on their property. And they also will put it on a water truck if it's in a public right of way. So to your whole point, I think there's an established practice and how the city utilizes that to potentially leverage it for those vulnerable communities that need trees. And you look at some of the things that SAWS has done with the purple pipe infrastructure. Did they
recycled water infrastructure?
Did they redline our city when they did it again? I mean, because there's certain areas that it's not available to. And what are those areas? They're the areas that need it the most, in theory. And so how do you work to achieve equality and equity across our city when you look at where you want to utilize the tree mitigation budgets too. I think that is a huge component because, you know, the city, I called and I asked, hey, can my neighborhood get on that list again? We are eligible for a tree. And they said, you know, Fairhaven has one of the highest returns. 30% was a high return on the cards when they would mail them and they would come and plant the tree. Typically across the city, it could be less than 15%. And so I said, well, you get your biggest bang for your money over here. Come on, we'll help. What can we do? Well, we don't have that equity score. You know, our houses are valued too much in our area. They want to focus on other areas. I understand that. But how can we help them too? You know, I think that's the other piece of it is bringing it all together. And then I'd be remiss because of the Texas legislature that is starting up. If you did not know, the Tree Mitigation Fund had been under attack at the state level, at the legislative level, not because of what we do here in San Antonio, but because of other cities up north who don't use the tree mitigation money for what it's supposed to be utilized for. So keep an eye on that. You may get an advocacy notice saying, hey, you know, help advocate, reach out to your elected officials in the upcoming legislative session about several of the local controls that we have here available to our city that are unique. So I just would be remiss if I didn't advocate for that for a policy standpoint, because they love to hear from you and I as neighbors, from your community, to talk about what's unique to us. You know, we're not paid advocates by any means, but I think it's important that we all recognize that the legislature is kicking off and we don't know what the bills that to penalize other cities who have may not been doing it the way it's supposed to be done could come out and have an adverse effect on our community for local control and to have our ability to do certain unique things in our community. And the tree mitigation is one of them. So that's all I wanted to add.
Thank you very much, Bianca. Extremely important. You'll probably hear from GEAA about that.
Yeah, and Debbie.
So Debbie on the GEAA team, you had a comment to add.
Debbie actually was the former city arborist.
So, in a nutshell, I think that one of the things the city could do is to actually accept the responsibility for tree planting and tree maintenance on public right-of-ways, including the right-of-way easement that they take or the easement they take in front of your yard. And this would really address low-income neighborhoods if they could have those street trees. And we know that the placement of street trees are the most effective for controlling heat island and air pollution, etc. So to me, that would be one huge step. And to make sure, there is 3 different documents that are ecosystem services provided by our tree canopy. And in those, we actually have a goal. To meet that goal, in the latest document that was released in 2021, they had to include the ETJ because we did not meet it. Yeah. And it's 30%.
Thank you, Debbie. We have one question from the young man who's been waiting, and then we'll take the lady next to him after that, and then we'll come back to our panelists and do a wrap up. So go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, we're talking about city and conversations with the county, but I want to know, like, what advice do you have for school boards in San Antonio for developing climate resilience policy?
Right, because we can't do it all, guys.
So I'm part of SAISD, so my child goes to HERF Elementary, formerly Douglas, who closed down last year. So one of the challenges that we had with SAISD earlier last year was having these conversations around schools not being equipped. This hasn't been a new issue. When we were a labor union, we had to really fight to keep both the heat and the AC on for workers, right, and for students. And so I think that's something that's necessary, that schools are just starting to participate in action plans and haven't been part of, like what the compañera said over here around how the CAP and the SA sustainability plan started out really, really strong, but as they filtered outside of a public process, they became, there was no participation from major entities in San Antonio, like school boards, and San Antonio has around 16 different school districts. And so that also makes it really hard to regulate things like this, but particularly for SISD and the public school districts, it's something that needs to be demanded for school boards, and there needs to be intentional participation. But this is something that they're starting to look at now, and sort of as a parent of SISD, we're also just starting to see some of these measures trickle out more rapidly. And I think this is actually a result of public pressure to ensure that students and workers are safe within extreme conditions and or are not at risk for being penalized for weather-related events. And so I think that's an important piece that each person, but also it needs to happen from a city perspective when the climate action and adaptation plan is actually a really good opportunity as it comes into review again to really push teeth. So one of the other pieces where that was what's government's role is to ensure that there is actually either penalties or a process for these grand solutions that community comes up with, and for them to actually get implemented. Because what is happening, particularly what happened with the cap, in our opinion, is that it went to agencies and it kind of got watered down, right? So it went through the committees and we had beautiful equity plans. We had conversations around like food and gardens and trees and things like that, and transition of energy. But then there was no real actual like movement towards those ideas. And I think that's an important part of like as we come up is ensuring that the public process for these plans for committee is actually in existence in the future. Because what we're starting to see and what has happened in the last few years is that committees have no public power. And that it goes behind doors. And I might offend some folks, and I'm sorry, but this has to do with our future, right? And we're frustrated, right? We're frustrated being part of committees, developing plans, developing protocols and policies, and then they get kind of shut down somewhere behind the scenes, right? I see a lot of people nodding. I've been part of those sitting for hours. We're like, yeah, this looks good. We're actually gonna get somewhere. A year later, the meetings end, and there's nowhere to go, right? So I think part of it is ensuring that there's like democratic processes for what's happening, and part of that is, and I know I might sound redundant, but we are Dreamweek, civil rights movement, the democracy, ensuring that the public is part of public decisions, and ensuring, and it's dumb. Sorry, it's the end of the day. I've been up since 6 a.m. That ensuring that they're like now we're still fighting just to be at the table, right? And communities are fighting just to be at the table, and I think that's the hard part, right? Is that there is no easy way. It's gonna take each one of us to be at each thing to ensure that in 5 years, in 20 years, these policies actually function and happen. Because we were there in 2006 with the nuclear wars, right? Not the nuclear wars, but the nuclear right? Yes, and things like that, right? So we were ensuring, and so now we're here and we're continuing to have these conversations and pushing, and we're still in the room, but at a certain point we're still fighting to still have a say in what happens in our community, right? And I think my recommendation is, if you can be on the board, be on a board. If you could be on a committee, be on a committee. And if you could talk to your community, do it, because that's really what it's going to take to ensure that like these things get passed. And so, and to go back to SAISD, I think they're still starting to trickle in a lot of agencies as well. But it's not because they made the decision, right? They didn't volunteer to do this. It's because there was either some type of economic incentive. So we should also make sure that people's sustainability and their eco systems are not relying on whether they get paid or not. right? It needs to rely on what's beneficial for our community or not. And so, and so they're getting there, but it's not gonna happen on its own, right? It's gonna take each and every one of us to be present, to participate, to create development, to create proposals, and submit them in order for this to actually, for our vision to actually happen. I'm sorry for my tangent, but we've been here. 10 years ago, we were probably having the same conversation.
Thank you very much for sharing what you thought was really the most important thing, one of the most important things to share, right? I know that there are more questions, but we are running close on time, so I want to make sure I give our speakers a few minutes to kind of wrap up what they want the audience to take away, and with a brief reminder that, you know, Bianca told us we're going into the state legislative session, right? It only happens every 2 years. We're also going into our local election season, right? Not the county election season, but the city election season as well. So maybe with that in mind, I know Laura's probably got to be sort of agnostic on that, but with those things in mind, kind of what are some of the takeaways you'd like to share with the audience? So I'll start with Dee.
I think I'm gonna piggyback on what Deanna just said, but not go quite so deep. And that's you know, being involved, and when you're on a city committee or utility committee, that we hold not only each other accountable, but we also hold our utilities accountable. We're shutting down our last coal plant. That's the result of work that Sierra Club did, that Southwest Workers did, and there's others in the room that worked on, you know, with the city, worked with the utility, saying we don't want coal. The Spruce Coal Plant emits nearly 7 million metric tons of carbon pollution every year. It is our single greatest polluter in the city, in the county, actually. And so it was the community that made that. It wasn't the bureaucrats. You know, utilities love coal because it's a money maker, but it also pollutes our air and it causes issues. So I would say, let's keep on pushing our utility to do better. Let's get off of fossil fuels. They're going to close a coal plant, but they want to also convert it to gas. That is the last thing we need right now, is more fossil fuels. So hold our city, hold our utilities accountable. Thank you.
Yeah, I think my closing statement is just reiterating that it's important to recognize the approaches that will worsen the ecological and economic crisis and name those as all solutions. It's important to really focus on the root causes. I didn't say much about the trees, but sometimes the trees are prioritized over people's health. And I understand that sometimes, so I didn't say anything. Because I was like, I love trees. But I also love our community too. And know that root causes, we need to make sure and call those out. And we need to work towards a just transition, not just a transition away from certain things, but ensure that all of our communities are safe, where we work, where we play, pray, where we learn, and all of those other spaces where we all love.
Thank you, Diana. We touched on this, and you know, we all have a role to play. So really, you know, take what you've heard back today, what you've read on resilience, right? You all each have expertise in what you do and what you do in the day-to-day. So whether it's in the individual, for yourself, you know, be prepared, right? I'd not be doing a good job if I don't say, you know, make sure, go home, prepare your emergency kit, your go bag, look at your home and what is in there, so that you are ready to respond and be ready to provide what you need for yourself and your family and your home. But also thinking about what you do in your work or whether your organization, in terms of how can you help really spread the work, whether it's leading a project, whether it's creating partnerships, not just with the city, but with other local jurisdictions and governments. And really, you know, the last piece of it, and I'd say, is understanding, you know, how we can convene and create these spaces for conversation, right? So thank you for GEAA for bringing us together. There needs to be more spaces where we talk about this, right? We don't do it enough. Silos exist, and there is a huge opportunity here in San Antonio with the wealth of resources and information and expertise that we have to really drive things forward. So my call to action is for y'all is to, like, let's get together, right, again, soon, through this process and the process that I'm doing through building the resilience strategy, and continue these conversations because we all have a role to play.
So our whole point, what was said by other folks, is we do all have a role to play, and figure out what your role is. Is it, you know, run for office? You know, apply to the board or commission? Or are you just going to volunteer your time in your neighborhood? Or are you going to volunteer your time in a nonprofit? There are many avenues for you to be engaged in your local community. And I'd be remiss, you started the conversation with regarding the politics side of it. We have 4 council members that are not returning, and we're going to have a new mayor for the first time in 8 years. That's a big decision, folks. And there's a lot of folks that are vying for that top job. And so it's important because, as you know, there's been a lot of work that's been done. There's a lot of achievements that have been made. Yet there's a lot more work to go. There's also some big decisions that are looming out there. Should I say that word marvel again? There are some big decisions that our community is looking at as we move to the next, you know, 8 years with whoever may be our mayor if they get elected that many times. You know, and the term limits are changing. You're not electing somebody for 2 years. You're electing somebody for 4 years. And so that's important because that's engendering trust with that person and helping move our city forward. And so I think those are some of the tough decisions that we all have to do the research and find that person that's going to advocate for our community and move us forward at the same time. There are so many complexities to this. And I just ask that each and every one of you continue to be engaged in your community. Thank you for coming out and supporting today's Dreamweek event. I think this is a critical event. There are many other events going on this week and next week too. And I think it's important that we all are engaged. And you don't have to be a paid advocate. You could just be a person that volunteers your time, because that's all I'm doing here. So I think that's important. And I thank everybody for coming out and, you know, continuing to show up and hold your government accountable. Our government should not fear daylight. Any decision they want to make should be held at the public, and you should have access to their process and procedures and how they get to their decision. Thanks.
Would you like to close this out, Annalisa?
Yeah, and I guess, do we have anybody who wanted to make
Comments or ask questions? Ask chance.
I'll make a comment. Our speakers covered this a little bit about being informed in the legislative session. I'm GEAA's policy director, by the way. I'm Rachel Haynes. So they talked about the importance of all of you being involved. And one thing we'd like to highlight is that attending committee hearings in the fall and analyzing those committee reports and seeing some of the bills that are coming through and hearing rumors of bills that are coming is, as we all know, what we talked about is that housing affordability is a crisis in Texas. Housing availability is a crisis. But to Diana's point of ensuring that the solutions do not do further harm, we have a pretty strong feeling that rolling back environmental regulations is going to be one way the state legislature attempts to bring down housing prices or to increase the building of houses. So just as citizens, being informed, being aware, monitoring that on yourself. GEAA is going to be releasing a report sometime in the next week or so, talking about the housing crisis and the water crisis and kind of putting forth our ideas of how we can help solve the housing crisis in a manner that doesn't make the water and the heat island and all of those other crises and the affordability crisis for people worse. So just
reiterating what everybody else has said, it's important that we're all involved, but know that GEAA is also doing it. So if you don't have the time and the commitment, just sign up for our newsletters. We'll get it all to you. You don't have to do it. We'll let you know what's going on.
Thanks, Tommy.
I just want to thank the panel and thank you for the convening of all of us here today. It is so critical. And from my vantage point, it's very clear that we've got a lot of empowerment on the full environmental science that is lacking in our community. We've got to continue to reach people in a mass media way, in a neighborhood way, in a one-on-one way to elevate environmental knowledge because we're kind of like the frog boiling in the pot. And I think that with climate change, you look at Los Angeles, and what climate change reminds us of is in an instant, our worlds can be shifted in ways that we didn't imagine. It's sort of like the pandemic with the migration of people who came to Texas from Illinois, from New York, from California. We weren't planning for that in our demographic shifts, and so water and the strain already on water when you have the Western United States in 1,200-year drought, and what happens when cities around us and states around us look for a place. We might think we have enough water, but do we really? And how do we look at the challenges of the contributing zones, the rivers and the streams that lead into our aquifer, and preserving them and getting some of that money that used to be for the aquifer preservation back to preserving our aquifer again. And we're turning into a desert. Average summer temperature in the future in San Antonio is going to be 108, so that's the same as it is in Dubai today. And I'll just say this about the nuts and bolts of your tree program, and I'll sit down. I never thought the tree mitigation program really was real because I never really could see the city of San Antonio plant a single tree. So I live in an inner city neighborhood that got a notice that said your neighborhood qualifies for a tree. So I was like, great, I didn't know it was a bonus, right? So I send the thing in the mail, and I waited, and nothing ever happened. I called the number. I kept the number, didn't tell them who I was. I wanted to see the same treatment everybody else gets. I couldn't get an answer at the city. Y'all had that happen 100 times. Service is terrible nowadays. And then one day I happened to be home, and I'm not home very often. And on a hot June day, on a metal flat truck is the tree cooking that they had brought. They didn't tell me to be home to receive this tree. And if I hadn't just happened to be at home and see it, they would have not left my tree. And they gave me 2 trees because said, yeah, I'll take second tree. But my tree had already cooked. And I nursed that tree as much as I could, but with our summer, it was the wrong time to plant. So it's important that we have the follow-up on the water, and it's important that you all come to the county. I created the first program for tree planting in the county with bare branches. But there's a lot more that we could be doing to help Medellin lower their temperature by 2 degrees by tree planting. And we need to get that story out so that people, because Lord knows, from the tourism industry, which has lost at least $9 billion in Texas from people don't want to come here in the summer anymore. It's too hot. And we're losing our tourism dollars. They would help us help get more of that going if they understood the connectivity between tree planting and lowering temperature. But we've got our work cut out for us. So I hope that we can do more to change our fleets. I hope that we can do more to change our energy companies' use of natural gas at both the city and the county. I hope we can do more and get the PACE program enacted in the county. I've tried for 10 years, haven't been successful in getting my colleagues to adopt it. But it's a no-brainer to me to help small businesses retrofit their stuff. But I just want to say thank you all for educating us today. And we should not just dream, but we should work to make sure that these things happen. So thank you very much.
By the way, do you think we could use our hotel motel tax to plant trees?
Yes, because, yes, you could. You could, just like they did for the gorilla exhibit. Because it's in a venue. So if we get the Coliseum or the venue tax in Willow Springs, we can put that as a landscaping thing. So you bet your biscuits. Let's go.
So I really want to thank y'all for being here. I want to thank our families. Oh, one more?
Just one quick thing,
Sure.
in reference to the trees. If anybody has, access to all the subdivision developers, and teach them the correct way to plant a tree. Because they can plant 1,000 of them, and if they don't do it correctly, they're gonna die. But my own daughter's subdivision, I was like, why do they do it this way? And so we dug and cleaned it up, but if they continue, all these subdivisions that are going up, there's not any use in planting.
The development code changed.
Yeah. And we,
The Bare Branches Alliance website has a lot of information on planting and preserving trees.
yeah. So this has been a great discussion, and there are things that we didn't get to, like how could we use building codes to make the city more resilient.
That one.
But there's a lot of stuff, and so like I said, I really want to thank. There were a lot of smart people in this room, and not the least of which is our panel. I'm so grateful to y'all, and we hope that this conversation will continue, and that we'll all keep working towards making it more resilient. So thanks so much, y'all. Oh, that was
Good to see you.
you all.
Oh,